Yeah, we start getting people to take their seats. My name is Fred Bell. I'm the vice chairman of the Air Museum. My dear friend who's next to me, a guy by the name of Russ Guzman, his father's on that wall. And Russ's father was in an F-4 that did a low-level attack that was hit by anti-aircraft fire. There were a couple of aircraft. There were Phantoms. They went in. The lead aircraft was hit, which was his father's aircraft. And the report was back from his wingman that they were KIA. In other words, that they were so low, there was no way that they could have survived the crash. About a year later, his backseat turns up is all broken up, turns up in a North Vietnamese prison camp. And that started the odyssey for this family. And I watched what it did because they reclassified his father from KIA to MIA, to missing in action. And it destroyed this family. It absolutely destroyed them because there was no closure. And having this guy was, and still is, a very good friend of mine. And when Dave did this exhibit, seeing Russ's dad's name on the wall was kind of brought all that back. And you all and the veterans that are here, God bless you, those of you who answered the call and did what your nation asked. You were not treated properly, and we can never forget that the debt that we owe anybody, no matter when they put on the uniform. And I have worn a bracelet for many years of someone who's also on that wall, the last pilot that was killed and missing. He was eventually found and returned to Arlington. I wore his bracelet for many years, and now I wear Hunter Lopez. Hunter participates in the Gold Star family. Hunter was killed at Abbey Gate on the Afghanistan pullout. We cannot forget those people. We cannot put a high price that we have to remember what it means when we put these kids in harm's way, and kids like Hunter, who had his, and the kids in Vietnam had the rest of their lives ahead of them, and they were killed. I knew Hunter, and it tears me up every time I think about this, and that there was no reason for him to die. But he answered the call, and that's what you do when you stand on the wall and defend our country. And so, to all of you, from the Air Museum's perspective, I want to let you know that, God bless you. We appreciate so much what you do. One of the things that is part of what I do is we can never forget, whether it's Desert Storm, whether it's Vietnam, whether it's Korea, whether it's World War II, all of the police actions. Hunter's image is in the hangar adjacent to this one, Hunter Lopez. We can never forget. And the other thing, we can never not hold our leaders accountable for losing men and women in harm's way. They have to be held accountable. The aftermath for Russ Goodman's family, Russ's father was eventually found in a crash site. Russ did get closure, and that his father actually was killed in the plane crash. But all of these folks, whether they're being held in a Taliban prison or somewhere in the far corners of the earth, or we deploy them to defend our country, we have to honor them. We are a military aviation museum first and foremost, and we will never forget, and you have my solemn promise on that. So with that, God bless you all. There are things that Dr. Dave's going to do that I normally do, and I'm going to turn it over to him and let him take you into the program. Again, God bless you. Thank you for being here.
being here. National Vietnam Veterans Day is annually observed March 29th. It commemorates the hardships suffered and sacrifices made by 9 million Americans during the Vietnam War. Not only the servicemen and women, but also their families who supported them during and after the war. This year marks the 50th year since the last of our personnel came home. And today we are extending to all Vietnam veterans a long overdue and sincere welcome home. And now, First Sergeant Michelle Webb's Desert Hot Springs High School Marine Corps Junior ROTC Guard will present the colors, followed by Shelley Huff Clark, who will lead us in the national anthem. Please rise if you can and remain standing until the colors are retired.
Oh, say, can you see by the dawn's early light what so proudly we hailed at the twilight's last gleaming, whose broad stripes and bright stars through perilous fight o'er the ramparts we watched were so gallantly streaming, and the rocket's red glare, the bombs bursting in air, gave proof through the night that our flag was still there. Oh, say does that star-spangled banner yet wave o'er the land of the free and the home of the brave?
Ready, cut! Forward, march! Cover, pull! Order, cut!
You may be seated. Thank you. Thank you, Color Guard. Thank you, Shelley. Really appreciate it. Now, I'm going to ask Monsignor Howard Lincoln to come and say a prayer for those that did not make it home. And then John Kruger will play taps.
Let us pray. Dear God, we remember all communities affected and scattered by conflict and war. Dear Lord, cover them with your love and may peace prevail. And especially we pray for those who courageously lay down their lives for the cause of freedom. May the example of their sacrifice inspire in us the selfless love of your Son, our Lord Jesus Christ. Bless the families of all our fallen troops, and fill their homes and their lives with your strength and peace. Amen.
Thank you, John. Thank you, Father. Included in the 58,000 men and women whose lives were lost in the Vietnam War, there were 2,646 who were missing in action, now giving the designation presumption of death. The remains of some 1,500 MIAs have yet to be recovered. In the early 70s, some 5 million POW MIA braces were worn with the goal of the return of all POWs and an accounting of all MIAs. Over there, you can see our POW MIA display, where we now have more than 2,000 braces on display. The third Friday in September is National POW MIA Recognition Day, and we will be holding our 7th annual POW MIA event in this hangar on Saturday evening, September 20th. POWs, POW, and MIA family members, and those who donated braces will be in attendance. Tickets are available at the gift shop for purchase today, or you may purchase them online at the Palm Springs Air Museum website anytime. First Lieutenant Tom Brassfield was a U.S. Army infantry officer in South Vietnam and also wore his friend's MIA bracelet. Tom, would you come up and say a few words, please?
Most of you know, as veterans, you should never start a story about Vietnam without the words, "This ain't no bullshit." And if you don't say that, then the person that's speaking, don't listen. My name is Tom Brassfield. I was born and raised in a city that I know of, known as Moscow West, to Berkeley, California. It's even worse now. Upon graduation, I went to the University of Nevada in Reno. When I started, there was 3,400 students. There's now 24,000. And when you went there as a male, UNR was a land-grant college, so you had to attend 2 years of ROTC. And then if you made it through the first 2 years, you get to sit down with the professor of military science and see if you want to go on to the next 2 years and get a commission in the Marine Corps or the Army. I took a commission in the Army, and as soon as I dropped my hand, I was off. 5 days later in Fort Bragg, North Carolina. I spent a year at Fort Bragg, and then during that time I went down to Fort Benning, Georgia. Had to go through infantry officer basic course, airborne school, and ranger school. So here I was at 20 years old, an airborne ranger infantry officer. One year away from being assigned to Vietnam. The person up here on the left is Mike Parsons, who was a good friend of mine at the university. When he graduated, he took a commission in aviation and has been missing in Vietnam since January 5th, 1971. He was stupid enough to volunteer, which we all know as veterans, you never volunteer for anything. He volunteered to jump on a a beaver, which most of you will recognize as a float plane that you see in the waters outside of Alaska, and specifically up in Alaska. They're float planes. He volunteered to jump on the plane and fly north to an area where they needed a pilot to fly a helicopter back south. And they only made it like 13 or 14 minutes out of going on, and he crashed, and he's never been seen since. And the picture to the right is a good-looking guy and his beautiful wife. That picture was taken 52 years ago. We've been married for 52 years, and you can see Mike's bracelet on Nancy's right hand. Stand up, Nancy, you're up. And now some of my thoughts. As you all know, as Dave said, there's a lot missing and a lot have been killed. And it all started back in 54, 55. And it went through a lot of presidents. It went through Eisenhower, Kennedy, Johnson, Nixon, and finally stopped in 75 with Gerald Ford. And these are some of my thoughts that you might get a kick out of before I get on to my journey as an infantry officer. You might remember Elvis Presley. Remember, he sat in a barber's chair at Fort Polk getting his hair cut. He served. And then you have people like Cassius Clay, who changed his name to Muhammad Ali. And you have John Lennon and Ogo that stayed in bed for 8 days in London to protest the war. And then you have the draft dodgers that went north to the border to Canada. I've always been concerned, I was always trying to figure out how many went south into Mexico. You know, if you could speak Spanish, the only thing that was wrong is your skin color was wrong. But nobody said anything about Mexico. And we were, in the 68, 69, and 70s, we had the privilege of listening to Neil Diamond and Creedence Clearwater Revival, who I went to high school with, and their pictures are on that back wall. We went through People's Park in Berkeley, which started it all, free speech, and we went through San Francisco parks with the flower people putting flowers down the ends of M1s of the National Guard. We went through university demonstrations. We went through city demonstrations. And we went through watching that last Huey take off from the top of the embassy in Saigon, and the North Vietnamese tank crashed through the gate of the embassy. I have no idea how that tank got there, because I patrolled QL1, which was the main highway between Saigon and Hanoi. I have no idea how that thing got there. And then we had the great climate czar, John Kerry, who sat in front of a Armed Forces hearing committee in Congress and called us a bunch of baby killers. And then there was the great babe that's still selling cosmetics and exercise equipment, the lovely Jane Fonda. And if some of you might have been part of General Westmoreland's high-speed conveyor belt, moving at high speed, carrying America's youth to a country called Vietnam, who they had absolutely no idea where it was, how to spell it, and everyone was still trying to figure out whether Vietnam was one word or two. Where have all the young soldiers gone and they've gone to everywhere. Here they are. This is a picture of myself and one of my infantry squads coming back from a night ambush. You ground pounders or grunts, let's take a good look at our boots, loaded with mud and the smell of buffalo dung. And here they are, 19 and 20-year-olds. Take a good look. There's three white soldiers, three black soldiers, and one great soldier from the Navajo Indian Nation, and myself all the way on the right. And you'll notice there's one thing that's hanging around most of our necks, which is a green towel, which is a real, you never went anywhere without your green towel. It was the best pillow that man could ever develop when you had to lay down on the ground and go to sleep. These are the soldiers that we placed our lives in each other's hands that night. They were well trained. They took orders. We served and we survived during some terrible times. Nothing prepared us for what we were to perform. Very few knew so little about our day and daily lives when sometimes we're so complex. We serve bearing true faith and allegiance to the Constitution, our oath, our unit, and our fellow soldiers. We served and we fought and we did the very best could. We served with selfless service, valor, honor, patriotism, integrity, and personal courage. You cannot be broken emotionally after serving. You must be strong. Vietnam was a place we left, but for some of us was a place that has never left us. I know everyone that feels that way can handle the baggage, and there's a lot of us that are carrying baggage from that place. So be strong. Some have no concept of our sacrifice that have given the freedom to make political fools and idiots of themselves. Don't send in the clowns. We know where they are. They're in Washington, D.C. For those of you that served in the Delta, the Highlands, QL1, the Coastal Gun Line, DMZ, Cambodia, and maybe one or two of you that snuck across the border in the north. Got a couple words for you. And they're not shitty words that we heard when we got back. And these two words are always fun to do. You're sitting at a Denny's restaurant or something and there's 3 or 4 guys with their little hats on. You know, I'm from this unit, I'm this unit, and they're all sitting around there eating their bacon and eggs. And you just come up to them and just look down at them, say these 2 words, and they just look back up at you. And they're in absolute shock. They don't know what to say. And when someone told me these words in an airport one time, I was shocked. Take the breath away from me. So Nancy and I would like to say to all of you vets, from the bottom of our hearts, welcome home.
Thank you, Tom. Thank you very much. We interviewed veterans here at the museum and sent the interview video to the Library of Congress. And there's more information on the back on one of those tables in back about that. So anyone we would love to interview about your experiences, about your whole life story. It's a nice thing to have for the family, particularly grandchildren, etc., that probably don't know anything about you back in those days. So take advantage of it. Now here is a short edited version of a 2013 interview of Air Force Staff Sergeant Scott Carson.
In '66, we'd gotten there in November, and the Bob Hope Christmas show was in, I think, early December, as I recall. And so that was a big deal. It was a command performance. Everyone that wasn't on active duty on the flight line had to go down to the show. And it was fun. I don't remember a lot of the details of the show. The one thing I had remembered, and I'd shared with my family subsequently, is that in early '67, when the show was aired here in the States, I got a letter from my mother that said, "Oh, by the way, we saw you on the Bob Hope Show." My wife and I one time sat down at the internet and tried to find the tapes of that show and never could. We were here in Palm Springs. I came to see the A-26 in the collection because it's a nice one, and ended up asking one of the docents if there was any tapes of the Bob Hope shows, in particular '66, and he said, "Oh, I think in the library." So Linda and I came up 2 days ago and eventually found that disc, and after watching '64 and '65, got into the '66 tape, and lo and behold, there was a face I recognized in that tape. The moments that touched me the most were when you had injured flight crew return, which we had a couple of times, and yet you still have to do your job, and the job's the job, and you do it. But there's people, and then it becomes more so, I think, for the Air Force guys than for the guys that were in the field, because they saw that all the time. For so many of us in the Air Force, the war was the airplanes coming back and the airplanes leaving, and then you'd be touched by a tragedy for somebody, and you realize this isn't a game. This isn't fun or funny. It's a job that has to be done, and you do the job the best you can. And I think that as I thought about this interview yesterday, the thing that's so important for me about the interview is to say thank you to literally the thousands and thousands that were there that never got thank you said. And that's what's different about that war from, I think, any other recent one we've been in.
When you came home, what was the reception like?
So we came home again on a charter through San Francisco, and then I flew commercial up to Seattle and had 2 or 3 weeks of leave coming before I went to Tucson. And the protesters, when you got off the airplane, that was hard. And some of them were siblings. And that was hard.
Do you think for the most part they were misguided, or?
It was such a complex time for this country. Were they misguided? I think where they were misguided is blaming those of us that were doing our job for the war, as opposed to focusing on the people that were responsible for the war. And that was really unfair. I know so many people that still today suffer from that. And we've had a son-in-law that's deployed now 6 times to the Middle East wars, flying F-16s. And I've been with him. I met him in Italy one time coming back. It's different for them.
Oh, yeah.
Really different. And I think for many of us from the earlier war, that's been the hardest thing to accept.
Okay, so that I interviewed him, and that touched me quite a lot. With us today is World War II veteran, Tech Sergeant Joe Sharon. Sergeant Sharon was an 81 millimeter squad platoon sergeant with the 25th Infantry Division in the Philippines, where he fought in the Battle of Luzon. By the way, last year Joe celebrated his 100th birthday. Joe?
I've been very fortunate. My folks, my mother, father, my brothers and sisters, my wife, never knew what I went through. They never asked, and I never told. And so, but this past year, I was very well accepted, and I had quite a few interviews. I'm really grateful. I've been doing this. Everybody knows me. I've been on newspaper, I've been on TV, I've been Channel 7 last Friday. That went over big time. And in fact, and there I mentioned that I was the first to land in Japan, an occupation. And I got a call yesterday from the Japanese TV. They want to interview me. So I'm very much involved. And let me tell you when I go out there, I'm talking about, youth and all the veterans and everything. They want me to tell the story of a combat veteran and tell the worst story that you were in. And that's what I did. They want the public to know what combat veterans go through. I mean, what's happening to our country right now, they don't understand, they don't really respect us veterans that gave our life to this beautiful country. And I speak to a lot of young little children. And we lost 650,000 men in World War II. And I asked the little children, I says, you know why we won this war? And he says, no. So I tell them, for the love of our country, the love of our Constitution. And you see that flag, and the love of that flag. So I get a standing ovation from these young kids. So I've been very much, but I'm speaking for all the veterans and all wars. I speak for the public. I don't want to see another war. I don't want to see another 18-year-old go through what I went through with many other 18-year-olds.
You know, a lot of these guys were fighting out in the jungle, pretty much like you were in that Battle of Luzon. What was that like out in the jungles?
It was a jungle fighting in Luzon. And I was only, at that time, I turned 19 years old. And so there was 100,000 Japanese surrounding this 47 ridges. And there was only 30,000 of us infantrymen to take them on. These ridges sometimes were as high as 6,000 feet high. And so when the jungle, in the first part of the jungle there, we lost a lot of our men. And so in my platoon, we lost a platoon sergeant, we lost all our sergeants. And I was only 19 years old. And so I was told by lieutenants and bosses, Mr. Sheriff, you're the platoon sergeant. And I was 19, that scared the hell out of me. I didn't know what to do. But I was smart. I got all the officers together in my platoon, and we worked together, and we were able to take over the rest of the ridges. In the 81 millimeter platoon, we always had 6 guns set up all the time. We needed a lot of space for those weapons. We were shelled many times by the Japanese. And I also was in 2 areas there where we were ambushed, and there I am talking to you. I should not be here. A lot of my men next to me were blown away. But, so what's happening to a lot of them that were killed, a lot of our friends,
I want to ask you a question. You have some medals here. Can you tell me what they are?
Well, I have one as the Emblem of the 25th Infantry Division, and I have one combat badge on here, and then I have Bronze Star. Well, I wear one of them, but I got 2 of them. And so,
Thank you, Joe. Hey, listen, Joe. You weren't here on your 100th birthday, so we have a little surprise for you. Shelley, would you come up here, please?
oh, beautiful Joe. Look at that. Yeah, that's easy to go on.
Marilyn Monroe too, but I need your help, okay? Happy birthday to you. Happy birthday to you. Happy birthday, dear Joe.
Joe. Thanks for coming up and sharing with us, and happy birthday from all of us. And by the way, when we have a large birthday, a welcome home cake back there. So Joe's going to be back there cutting the first piece, and then he'll stick around back there and be glad to chat with you. So thanks a lot, Joe. And now, will all World War II veterans and those civilians who suffered the hardships of World War II, including Natalina Garitano, who nearly lost her life in a Nazi bombing attack on her town in southern Italy when she was 11 years old, please stand. But Natalie, you stand up first. There she is back there in the black with the black hat on. So, and a GI across the street, what happened was she was covered in rubble. A building next to her fell on her, and this GI came, pulled her out, and saved her life. World War II veterans, please stand. There you go. Thanks for being part of the greatest generation. And now will all Korean War, Cold War, post-Vietnam veterans please rise. Down, guys. Thank you. Thank you for your service. Now let's get the flag back. Thank you. And now, all Vietnam veterans who served in a combat zone, please rise. Thank you guys for going into harm's way. And now let all of us who served during Vietnam and all Vietnam veteran family members please rise. Thanks to all of you for your service and for your support. By the way, we have a number of Vietnam veteran lapel pins, Vietnam family lapel pins. And thank you, Vietnam Veterans lapel pins. Buy a cake in the back for you to pick up after the program. So check those out. And now, a special welcome home video.
Hi, my name is Tiffany Sims, and I am a kindergarten teacher at San Benito Elementary School in Atascadero, California. On behalf of our school, our friends, and family, we want to thank you for your service and welcome you home.
I think
kindergarten for 30 years and has sent you this message. I teach at San Benito Elementary School in Atascadero, California. We have never missed a day of our pledge other than when I have been absent due to illness. I have our students look directly at our beautiful flag and visualize the men and women who keep our country safe. We will forever be grateful for their service. Around Thanksgiving, we spend a lot of time talking about what we are thankful for. Now, a normal 5-year-old will commonly say, I'm thankful for my doll or for my bike. But you would be surprised how many of my kiddos say, I am thankful for the soldiers. It warms my heart. My little kindergartens and I send you a great big hug to all of you. Tiffany. Okay. Okay, another lady with us today is Susan Anton. Susan grew up in Oak Glen, California, just up the road from here, graduated from Yucaipa High School in 1968. You may remember her from her movies. That included Golden Girl in 1979, in which she starred as an Olympic gold medal winner, her TV shows, and her concerts. In 1970, Susan was crowned Miss California, and later that year was a finalist in the Miss America pageant. And in August of 1970, Susan toured for 22 days with the 4th Miss America USO show in Vietnam. So Susan, why don't you come up here and tell us a little bit about that, and I'll ask you a couple of questions about what you were doing there.
Hi, everybody. This is really emotional. To be here with all of you with such a gratitude, respect, and appreciation for everything that you and your families have done for all of us that have enjoyed blessed lives of freedom. We couldn't have that without you. And I look at these young faces and those girls out there singing, and so much of it brings it back to me. I was 18 years old when I was asked to join the Miss America USO tour, and I was more than eager to go and do whatever I could, because I knew so many of the young men over there were my age. They were boys from my high school, or where I hoped to go to college. Boys my brother's age, my boyfriend's age. And you watch the war back then, you could see it on television, Vietnam. It was the first time, and it was a staggering thing to witness. In the safety of my living room, on the black and white television, as Walter Cronkite would talk about it. And nothing prepares you, and for what it's like to get off of that aircraft carrier, not a carrier, but a plane, and land in Vietnam. And you're assaulted immediately with the smell and the weight of the humidity. And you can feel and smell death and fear. And I wasn't afraid until I got there. But the minute that the GIs picked us up, I knew that I was safe. And man, did you guys take care of us every step of the way on our 22 days there. To the DMZ, out to the 7th Fleet, and beyond and beyond. And hearing the expression, round eyes, I heard it everywhere I went. And I treasured that. And you wanted to wear your hair extra pretty. You wanted to do anything you could as an American girl to make you, dear, sweet American boys, feel a little bit of home in your heart for even just a minute. And so, we had a segment in our show where we would invite some of the GIs to come and dance with us. And oh man, you guys scared. You got out there on the dance floor, and I remember this one young man just shaking. He said, I just haven't seen an American girl in so long. And so many of them would give me phone numbers to call their mom when you get home. Let her know that you saw me and that I'm okay. And, or girlfriends, and these patches. I can't tell you the number of patches that I remember getting from some of the fellas over there. And you guys would save your rations for us, like we needed food, we didn't. But you would save the best of what you had for us. You'd make sure we had a cake. You'd make sure we even had steak. So we were treated like royalty in one place in particular because I was Miss California. We landed on the USS California, and normally Miss America got all the fanfare. But when I got off that helicopter on that deck, oh man, everybody there was in their yellow turtleneck sweatshirt that said USS California. And it was like, yay, Miss California. And I never felt so special in my life. It was thrilling. The hardest part, we were stationed in Saigon. The hardest part of the entire tour was visiting the hospitals. And so seeing that when China Beach, young, sweet, beautiful boys that should have had their whole life in front of them, just ripped to pieces. And I remember one of the first things we were taught is never ask anybody how they're doing. How do you think we're doing? We were taught, ask them if they're long or short. You remember that expression? How much longer do you have? Or are you on the short side? Will you be going home soon? So the one theme that I'm hearing here that's the most important, because it was a very confusing time. We had the demonstrations at home, and so many of the people that were demonstrating, they hadn't seen up close. They didn't know. They were ignorant to what you were doing. They were ignorant to the cost, that it wasn't your choice to be there, but you were honoring your country and your duty. And long overdue, we do say welcome home, and we say a heartfelt thank you, and God bless all of you that are here, and the many that are not, and your precious, precious family. So I salute you, and I thank you with all my heart.
Thank you, Susan. Hey. Susan, there's someone in the audience who was at one of your shows over in Vietnam in 1970.
I hope he has a good review.
Is Chief Ward 4, Randy Zahn. Randy, why don't you come up here and tell us what you remember about that day.
55 years ago. Oh my God. Did you fly us around?
I flew you back to Denmark.
Here, turn around.
I flew you back to Denmark after the show.
Did you come to the show, or were you on duty?
Here.
That's right.
When I first saw the picture, I recognized it from the shrapnel holes on the wall.
That looks familiar, huh? Oh my God! You look so great. You're like Benjamin Button. Who are these little ones?
That's my granddaughter. And my grandson.
Hi! Oh, what a handsome son you have. What's her name? Rachel? Hi, can I say hi, Rachel? Hi, Rachel. Can I see you? And what's his name? Calvin? Come here. Look what I've got. Come here. Come here. Look at it. That's Obi-Wan Kenobi. And he doesn't know what to do with little kids yet. He goes, they're like the size of dogs, but they don't look like dogs.
Randy, so where were you stationed when you saw her?
I was at Food Bin with the 1st Life Cap. I had the privilege of flying her back to Denmark.
Yeah.
We had a California crew, myself
Yay,
and Mike
California.
Smith.
Did you?
Yeah.
It's so good to see you all these years later.
Me too.
When did you get back? Wait, when did you get back in the States?
March 15th of 71.
71, so not long after we were together. I'm so glad you made it home and had that handsome boy and those beautiful grandchildren to celebrate your life and all that you've done.
Thank you for being here.
My pleasure. I just want to say one other thing. My brother Todd, who's a historian and a history teacher, and he'll know this well, because our dad served in 2 wars, World War II and the Korean War. And the one thing he taught us all, time and time again, because I had the privilege of singing the national anthem many times, he said, kids, just always remember every time you see that flag up there, it takes a lot more than rope to keep that flag flying. So we thank you.
Thank you, Susan. Susan mentioned her brother Todd sent it to us.
As Dave said, my name is Randy Zahn. I'm a docent here at Palm Springs Air Museum, and I am a proud Vietnam veteran. March 28th, 2017, President Trump signed into legislation the Vietnam War Veterans Recognition Act. recognizing March 29th, the last day that we had soldiers withdrawn from Vietnam, as Vietnam War Veterans Day. So for those of you who served, thank you very much. Welcome home. Glad you're here. Today is a little bit unlike any other day for us. Memorial Day is a day that we honor those who gave their lives for our country. Veterans Day is a day that we honor those who served in any war in any capacity for our country. But today we get to honor those of us who served in Vietnam. What makes today special is the fact that we finally get recognition that I feel that we deserved a long time ago and never received. As you may recall, Vietnam, according to our government, was never a war. It was a conflict, or it was a police action, but whatever the hell you wanted to call it, it was a war. And it was an unpopular one. When we came home, we didn't come home to, well, that's me when I went home there. When we came home, we didn't come home to ticker tape parades or any other kind of recognition. What we came home to was protest, vitriol, and a lot of us were shunned for many, many years. On July 28, 1985, I had the honor of flying the lead Huey in a mock combat assault in Oshkosh, Wisconsin. And for those of you who aren't familiar with Oshkosh, it's one of the largest air shows in the world. I was flying a UH-1 Mike model gunship, leading a formation of 9 Hueys. And our purpose was to land and perform a mock combat assault at the air show to commemorate Vietnam veterans. Prior to our show time, we were loitering out of the airport at Fond du Lac, Wisconsin, a short distance to the south. I had briefed the flight, and we were waiting for our show time to come. And in the meantime, we had a young female TV reporter come up to us. And she asked if she could ask us a question. And she started off by saying, when you guys came home, you weren't treated very well. And she wanted to know, what can America do now to make up for the way you were treated back then? And a very good friend of mine, Chuck Beatty, looked at her and he said, you know, he said, I spent 2 months in the hospital at Camp Zona, Japan, after getting shot down. Came home in a wheelchair. He said, my best friend from grade school was there to greet me. He said, I was really excited. And he came over and he spat in my face, called me a baby killer. And he said he's never spoken to me since. And 17 years later, tears were rolling down Chuck's face. He said there's nothing that anybody can ever do to take the pain away from that moment. Well, since I was a helicopter pilot, I can share a few things about helicopters that you might not know. Vietnam was known as the helicopter war. And I want to start with the medevac mission. Because if it hadn't been for the medevacs, many of us, including myself, might not be here today. Does anybody know when the first medevac mission took place? In 1944 in World War II. Nobody knew we had helicopters in World War II. Lieutenant Carter Harmon was the pilot of an R-4, Sikorsky R-4 helicopter. And he was stationed in Thailand, and the pilot of a Stinson-Reliant, who was ferrying 3 wounded soldiers back, was shot down and landed, or I should say crashed, in rice paddy in northern Burma. And Lieutenant Harmon had the closest helicopter. He was 500 miles away. So he took off after several landings to go up to rescue these guys one by one. The R4 had a maximum horsepower of about 200 horsepower. And he flew up there, and he picked up one of the guys, and he had to take him to a makeshift airfield a little distant, so that he could get flown back by another L-1. Well, he rescued the first 2 guys, and when he went back to get the third one, the temperature of his engine, it was overheating, and it shut down and stopped operating. So he ended up spending the night with the other two guys in the rice paddy. And in the morning, when the sun came up, his engine had cooled, he was able to start the engine, he rescued the other two guys, and they got flown back. It was the first recorded helicopter rescue medevac mission in Army history. In Korea, you probably remember the series MASH and the OH-13 that was immortalized in the opening scenes. We've got one hanging up back there in the back of the hangar. That was the first dedicated medevac helicopter in Korea. In Vietnam, medevac helicopters, or dust-off as we call them, flew over 500,000 missions and flew and saved over 900,000 wounded. Americans, South Vietnamese, North Vietnamese, and Viet Cong. The average time between being wounded and being in a medical facility was less than 1 hour in Vietnam. Without them, like I said, many of us might not be here today. During our involvement in Vietnam, 11,827 helicopters served in all different branches of the service. Of the more than 40,000 pilots who flew helicopters in Vietnam, 2,202 were killed, along with 2,704 crewmen. The UH-1 Huey, that little girl right there, is probably the most iconic helicopter in the war. Ask any veteran in this room what the sound of a Huey means to them. Most will say it means help is on the way in one way, shape, or form. The UH-1 flew 10,693,902 hours in Vietnam. It was followed quite distantly by the Cobra that I flew, which is on the other side over here. Cobras flew 1,166,344 hours. Those two aircraft have more flight time of any combat helicopter or any combat aircraft in modern warfare. I went to Vietnam in March of 1970. I was a naive 19-year-old California kid. I was assigned to Charlie Troop, 1st Squadron, the 9th Cavalry Division, 1st Cav. Unlike most wars, Vietnam had no front lines. We had no idea where the enemy was, and we had no idea where they were going to attack from next. So we were the eyes and the ears of the 1st Cavalry Division. Our mission was to go out and find the enemy, and we did that by flying what we called hunter-killer teams. Okay? The Hunter was the OH-6 Loach, a light observation helicopter. It was built in Culver City by the Hughes Tool Company. It was very fast, it was very maneuverable, and it was very, very crash-worthy. We had one guy who was shot down 3 times in one day in a Loach. Their mission was to find the enemy. And they would do that, they would hover over the triple canopy jungle using their rotor wash to blow apart the branches so they could see what was on the ground. They could often find the enemy by the smell from a campfire, a cooking fire, or even their perspiration. And their job was to get shot at. It's the only way we knew where the bad guys were. My job as a Cobra attack helicopter pilot was to protect the little bird. If we couldn't see him, we couldn't protect him. The Cobra, as you might see over there, is a very slender helicopter. It's 36 inches wide. Has a top speed of 190 knots or 219 miles per hour. It could dive 90 degrees. It could bank 135 degrees. At least that's what the Dash 10 flight manual said. Many of us who flew them exceeded the limitations, shall we say. The other mission that we had was to have rockets on target. We had to be very, very precise because we were often shooting within 10 feet or less of our friendlies because that's how close the enemy was to them. So when we started out in the front seat as a co-pilot gunner, we had a lot to learn because the aircraft commander in the Cobra was the mission commander on the mission. So we had no navigation means to find a grid coordinate out in the jungle. So we used what was called dead reckoning. And we had to be very precise. We had to first identify where our friendlies were. So if we had to put in an airstrike, artillery, aerial rocket artillery, a section of fighters, we had to know exactly where they were. And we had to send in spot reports. Anytime we found something, whether it be a bunker complex, a huge complex, we were getting shot at, we had to send a spot report of exactly where that was taking place. So we had to be expert map readers. And all the time we were doing all this other stuff, besides talking on 3 different radios, we had to keep our eye on that loach. Like I said, if we couldn't see him, we couldn't protect him. And the only thing to defend him was the Cobra. Oops, I got ahead of myself here. Let me go back just a second. Yeah. Yeah, one of the first missions I was on, I was coming back from up north, and we were heading back to base camp, and we were told that a convoy had been ambushed. And as soon as we got there on site, I saw these big green golf balls come flying by the aircraft. And we took evasive action, and I said to my aircraft commander, and I was very new, I said, "What the hell was that?" And he said we were being engaged by a 51 caliber machine gun. And it was at that time I went, holy crap, there's people down there who are really trying to kill me. Big attitude change. March 1st, 1970, I should say May 1st, 1970, we were finally able to go into Cambodia. Back here in the States, the reporters were saying that the troops were protesting because we didn't want to go into Cambodia. Well, I can tell you that fake news was alive and well in 1970 because nothing was proven than the truth. It was the first time that we actually got to go after the enemy in their base camps and sanctuaries in Cambodia. And over the next 2 months, the NVA paid a very, very heavy price. We found caches of weapons, crew-served weapons, individual weapons, millions of rounds of ammunition, hospital complexes, administrative complexes, training centers, you name it, we found it. These are some of the pictures from a cache called Rock Island East that we had found. And I didn't want to really tell a war story today, but this one has a direct bearing on something that happened 34 years later, so if you'll bear with me, I'm going to tell it. The day after Christmas in 1970, we were based out of Phuc Vinh, about 30 miles north of Saigon. And our intelligence people had word that the NVA battalion was coming across the border north of Tay Ninh to attack the city of Tay Ninh. And they wanted us to go up there to try to intercept them as they crossed the border. Well, we went up there, and we were laundering out of a place called Tinh Nguyen. It was an old French fort back when they were in Vietnam. So that's where we laundered out. And my scout ship and I were up on the border doing visual reconnaissance, which is what we call our mission, actually looking for the bad guys. And in one of my orbits, as I'm circling around the scout ship, I saw a big column of black smoke. It's a 20 millimeter Vulcan cannon, by the way. Yeah. So we saw this big column of black smoke, and I called back to our operations because I couldn't tell exactly where it was. It was down towards Tay Ninh. So I called back and I asked, I said, "Have you heard anything or seen anything?" Because I got this big column of black smoke. And he told me that I haven't heard anything, we don't see anything. So it was time to investigate. So I asked my little bird to come up to altitude. Once we got to a safe altitude above small arms range, we headed south. And the smoke that we saw was on this road between Tinh Nguyen and Tri Bai, where you see the access for the ambush took place. And when I got there, I saw a bunch of trucks, APC, V100s that were burning. The NVA battalion that we had been searching for actually had crossed the border days in advance, so they're much, much closer to Tinh Nguyen than we had thought. Over the course of the next couple hours, as soon as we got there, actually there were guys, South Vietnamese soldiers on the east side of these vehicles pointing to the west and shooting to the west. And I looked over to this field and there was just a whole field full of NVA soldiers. And they were running towards the tree line. So I got on the radio and I called for all of our other teams to come down there. Over the next several hours, our Cobras and the Scouts and a section of Air Force Close Air Support fighters came down there and we annihilated the entire battalion. I'm going to come back to that in a little while. I came home on March 15th, 1971, and coming home wasn't all it was cracked up to be, as you heard from other people who've spoken before me. I didn't actually get spat upon, but I was called baby killer, child killer, murderer, you name it. And when the other guys got home, it hadn't stopped. It continued on, and it got to the point in 1973 where I actually left the country for 5 years. I went back to Southeast Asia, actually. I started out going back to Indonesia, Borneo, Singapore, Thailand, Vietnam, no, not Vietnam, Thailand, Malaysia, and Burma, working, flying helicopters. So, yeah, when I came home, as I said, it wasn't all it was cracked up to be. The guys, many of my friends were still there, and if they were still there physically, I was still there mentally. You don't let go of it, you don't forget. It's really difficult to explain the bond that we had. It's difficult for those who've never been in combat to explain what it's like to live together, work together, fly together. You have to remember back then there was no Zoom, there was no Facebook, there was no FaceTime. All we had was each other, 24/7. And you probably heard the band of brothers. Well, I'm in one of those bands. On July 4th of 2000, we had a reunion in Washington, D.C. It was Y2K, kind of cool. And we were invited to participate in the annual 4th of July parade in Washington, D.C. So it was a very, very hot, humid day. And we walked the route. And at the end of the parade route, pretty much everybody that was participating went in different directions. But the one group who didn't leave the parade route when we got back was the Korean War vets. They were all standing at the side of the road at attention, saluting us in their wool uniforms in that very, very hot, humid day, paying tribute to us. And I totally lost it. We didn't get parades or recognition when we came home. In fact, we had to raise money to pay for our own monument. Jan Scruggs, the U.S. Army veteran, started the Vietnam Veterans Memorial Fund. And the wall was built with $8.4 million of private donations. It is the most visited monument in Washington, D.C. Who amongst us doesn't know the name of a friend or a relative on that wall? If you've not been there, I would say go. You will not be alone. And let us not forget, the research that I did said that we had 11,000 female serving in Vietnam. 9,900 of those were nurses. And for those of us who were wounded and spent any time in a hospital, we all had our own nurses. They were our angels. This is the nurse and the crew that took care of me when my hooch got blown up in September of 1970. To recognize the women's veterans, Diane Carlson Evans, a nurse in Vietnam, started the Vietnam Women's Memorial Project to raise awareness and funds for the memorial to honor our women vets. In 2005, I was contacted by a gentleman His name is Rick Oakey. He owned a company called Black Horse Productions, and he was doing a series of documentaries for what at that time was the military channel. He had taken vets back to Guadalcanal, Iwo Jima, Korea, Normandy, and he was now looking for vets to go back to Vietnam. He had read my book, Snake Pilot, and got a hold of me and asked me if I would like to participate. Well, I did, and I was anxious, but I was totally apprehensive about going back. I first flew down, I was living in Alaska at the time, so I flew from Anchorage down to LAX, where I met the other guys that were going back. One of the gentlemen going back with me was Brian Holcomb, who had flown a lot of missions with me in Vietnam, and our former commanding officer, Galen Rocher. So, at our meet and greet at LAX, we met the rest of the guys that were going back with us. There were some Air Force guys, some Navy guys, and there were other guys from the Vet Center in Corona who had been struggling with PTSD. Well, the flight over Ho Chi Minh City was a lot different than my original flight to Vietnam. We were in a Korean Airlines 747, nice looking flight attendants, great food, great drinks, and it was like, wow, this is great. And when we got to Vietnam, well, this is the three of us getting ready to go. But when we got back to Vietnam, like Susan said, we were really apprehensive, thinking about the smells, and the humidity, and the cordite in the air, the human feces, all this nasty stuff that hits you like a sledgehammer when you get off the airplane. But we didn't experience that. We arrived at a very nice, clean terminal building with a jetway. We walked in, nice air conditioning, totally different. And we waited there until our host got cleared customs and immigration for us, got all our stuff. Well, over the next 3 days, we returned to our old base camp at Phu Quyen. This is what it looked like when I was there originally. And we went to many other locations that meant a lot to us, and places that were deeply embedded in our memories. There's a village where that ambush took place. This is the exact section of that road where those burning vehicles were. This is it now. It was in 2005 when we went back. There was a small tea shop there, and these four gentlemen were sitting there talking, and one of our guides / interpreters went over to talk to them. And I walked over and I said, "So what are they saying?" And he said, "Well, first they want to know who you are and what you're doing here. Why are you here?" So he explained to them. He said, "I told them in a very somber voice that many years ago a lot of people died in this place." And I got to thinking, and I said, "Could you please ask them a question for me?" And he said, "What's that?" I said, "Can you ask them what their feelings are about our involvement in Vietnam?" Well, he asked the question, and one of the guys got up and started that. And I thought, oh man, I got to open up a can of worms. And I said, "What did he say?" And he says, "He doesn't understand why you beat yourself." And I didn't understand what he was talking about. And I said, "Can you explain it?" He said, "America sent your sons and fathers over to fight for our freedom, and you should be proud of that, so why do you keep beating yourselves?" When he was really active, why do we keep beating ourselves up for a war that was lost 2 years after we pulled out? And it got me to thinking. So a little history refresher. The Paris Peace Accords were signed on January 23rd, 1973 by the United States, North and South Vietnam, and the Viet Minh. In Washington, D.C., they were heralding the day as VV Day, as Victory in Vietnam Day. But one of the clauses written into the Accords was what's called the enforcement provision. And I'm going to paraphrase it. It says, should the South require any military hardware to defend itself against any North Vietnam aggression, the U.S. will provide replacement aid to South Vietnam on a piece-by-piece, one-to-one basis. So what that meant was we were going to replace a bullet for a bullet, a truck for a truck, a helicopter for a helicopter. Well, President Nixon resigned in August of 1974, and in November of 1974, we voted in a new Congress. Well, the Congress immediately voted to defund the military aid that we had promised to Vietnam. Shortly thereafter, they started testing President Ford. The clause was written in there because our delegation knew for a fact that North Vietnam was not going to abide by it. So when President Ford got in, they were going to test it. So they started, the North Vietnamese came down and they took a hamlet, and then they took a village, and then they took a city. And on April 10th, President Ford called a combined meeting, or whatever you want to call it, congressional delegation, to beg them to please refund the provision that we had made and to provide the aid that we had promised the South Vietnamese. Well, our new Congress not only would not refund it, they got up and walked out. And 20 days later, Vietnam fell. So, for those of us who fought there, we did not lose the war. A lot of people, when they knew I went back to Vietnam, a lot of people had asked me what was it like going back. And I actually kept a diary of every day that I was there. So I thought, since it's, a lot of people have asked the question, rather than try to recreate it, I'm going to read to you what I wrote on day 1 and day 7. So this is right up front, personal, it had just happened. And so it's small print, so just bear with me here. So, day 1, Kim dropped me off at Anchorage International Airport at 7:30, and after a 2 on-time departures, I arrived at LAX on schedule. Within 30 minutes of touching down, I met Brian in the lobby of the hotel. I put my stuff in the room and we went over to meet the other guys who were traveling with us back to Vietnam. They all seemed like really nice people. One of the guys, Bill Ledmore, is taking his son back with him. I wish I was doing the same. For slightly less than $500 more than it cost me to get from Anchorage to LAX, Korean Airlines flew us back to Vietnam, a place that I had left 34 years and 7 months earlier. Remember the days of young, slender flight attendants with great smiles and who were actually pleased to serve you the 2 hot, full 3-course meals? Well, let's hear it for Korean Airlines. The first flight to Incheon was 12 hours and 42 minutes, and the flight to Ho Chi Minh City was 4 hours and 12 minutes. I was apprehensive when we landed in Ho Chi Minh City, and I waited for the door of the plane to be opened for the blast of hot, humid air and the foul smell that I remember from Vietnam, but it never came. We walked into the jetway and into an air-conditioned terminal building where we waited for our location guy, Ed Henry, to obtain our visa. I didn't recognize anything of Tan Son Nhut or Saigon on the way to the hotel, but I was never really very familiar with either. After a few hours of sleep, we had a wonderful breakfast of traditional Vietnamese pho. It was awesome. As soon as we finished, we loaded up our 2 buses and headed north into 3 Corps. Nothing was familiar. The once desolate dirt road north to Phuc Vinh is now a paved highway with houses and small businesses virtually the entire way. That was the base camp back then. The bridge, we crossed the Son Bay River just south of Phuc Vinh, and the old bombed-out bridge remains alongside the new one. With the help of some 35-year-old maps, we were soon on the runway of our base camp at Phuc Vinh. The runway is all that remains. We put down so much petaprime on the runway that nothing will grow there. The Vietnamese government has destroyed virtually everything and anything that could remind people of the U.S. presence. There are no roads, no buildings, and no foundations, nothing, which made it very difficult to locate our area of the base camp. What does remain is the old yellow tower that occupied the Arvin compound behind our hooches in our revetments. That found that we located our area, but like I already said, it is nothing more than an overgrown piece of ground. The Army of the PRV has a base directly across the runway from where we were, and not being too happy with our being there, especially with cameras, we were asked, no, not really, we were told to leave. Very shortly after we drove out what used to be the main gate, we were pulled over by 4 uniformed National Police officers who insisted we follow them to their headquarters. In country for about 10 hours, we were basically placed under arrest until our guides could spring us. All in all, I guess we were POWs for about 10 minutes. Once we were extracted from that little predicament, we continued up Highway 1 towards Dong Xoa. When we were in Vietnam, Dong Xoa was a crossroad in the jungle, burned out hooches, an old airstrip. It was an old special forces camp. Today, it is the provincial capital of Binh Phu province with a population of 130,000 people. So needless to say, it's totally unrecognizable. So this intersection is the one you saw in the previous picture. Our goal was to find the abandoned Special Forces base at Rang Lang and ultimately the field where my roommate Kevin Fry was killed. We were unsuccessful at both. The problem is that during our generation of the war, there was nobody here. Well, the population has been totally relocated from other areas of Vietnam, so nobody who's currently there now was there back then, so nobody even knew where Rang Lang was. We headed east until I felt we were north of Rang Lang. A 2-story house was being constructed, and we got permission to go up on the 2nd floor to try to ascertain our position, to no avail. I was and still am sure that we were in the area. The next thing I knew, we had hired 7 locals to take Brian, Galen, and myself, along with the director, a cameraman, the sound guy, and one of our interpreters, further into the jungle in an attempt to locate the area. On motor scooters. The roads were muddy. Remember the red mud? Bumpy and twisting dirt tracks, which is precisely why we couldn't take the buses. To say I was a bit apprehensive about riding into the jungle unarmed on the back of a scooter at last light would be a pretty gross understatement. We passed an eerily familiar field at the crest of some high ground before stopping. It was getting dark, and with the limited information we had, we knew our search that day would prove fruitless. I'm quite certain that we were within a mile of both locations. I knew it. I felt it. As we stood on that hill in the middle of the jungle, I was reminded of something that Mrs. Fry had told me on the phone in 1998. She told me that she knew when they dropped Kevin off to catch his flight to Vietnam that they would never see him alive again. I asked her why, and she told me that as she and her husband were leaving the airport, that the bright, clear, sunny day turned into rain, lightning, and thunder. I'm sure that Kevin was up there watching us today and laughing his butt off at these 3 old middle-aged farts running around the jungle at last light trying to find the field he died in. How do I know? Because as we stood there in the now tranquil jungle looking over the horizon to the south, we were treated to a spectacular view of a lightning storm far off in the distance. He may be laughing, but I took this as a sign that Kevin was acknowledging our effort. And there on that hill, I said goodbye. Something I never had an opportunity to do before he left. We remounted the scooters and headed back to the buses. When we arrived, the rest of the guys were surrounded by children, smiling, laughing, friendly, happy, and unpretentious. They had smiles that lit up the world. We stayed and played with them for several minutes as their parents stood by and smiled and bowed at us. Saying goodbye to our new little friends, we made our way back to Dong Xoa. Driving past the houses, I couldn't help but notice the meager life these people live. The living rooms are almost identical, furniture bare, save to say a single hutch with a TV on it. And the thing that struck me most was how happy they appeared. And then I couldn't help but wonder how many of these families were in some way affected by my presence in their country 35 years ago. I'm not sure I want to know the answer to my own question. Day 7, Saigon. I guess the thing that surprises me the most is that most people still call the city Saigon instead of Ho Chi Minh City, its official name. When we arrived a week ago, the city was quiet and almost lifeless. But then it was about 2 o'clock in the morning when we finally left Tan Son Nhut. Now it is a hub of activity as the 8 million plus residents begin their day's activities. We load into a bus and head out to shoot some scenes in the city. The first stop is the War Remnants Museum. It is the place that I think all of us were uncomfortable. American aircraft, artillery, replicas of the infamous Arvin Tiger cages where they supposedly held and tortured VC and NVA POWs. Much of the information presented, in my opinion, is inaccurate. It is very much a hooray for us type of place. We were happy to leave. The next stop was the reunification palace, the former embassy. As we drove through the gates, I can still see in my mind's eye the T-54s crashing through these same gates in 1975. Replicas of the tanks are on display, while I assume the real McCoys are on display somewhere in Hanoi. The grounds were beautiful, well-kept, and park-like. It is only now that I stop and reflect and once again ask myself what it was all for. What a tragic waste it was, and the next question I ask myself is, what did we learn from our experience in Vietnam? The answer is painfully clear, not a damn thing. Moving on, we continue to the Rex Hotel, the place where some people spent their entire year, where the dignitaries and the media stayed. The media, don't even go there. We take some shots of a group of us walking down the path from a very stylized statue of Ho Chi Minh. We walk with our heads held high, almost defiantly. It is the way we feel. Once we complete the shoot, we go to the top of the Rex for lunch. From our elevated vantage point, I can see the Caravella Continental hotels. All three of these hotels were there during the war years. The rest of the last day in country is spent shopping, getting massages, and walking the streets. None of us felt unsafe or uncomfortable as we walked the streets of this once dangerous city. As I've said before, it's a different place. Vietnam has always been a land of contrast, but none more so than the contrast between 1970 and 2005. 35 years have passed, a lifetime to many. We have accomplished what we set out to do. Rick got us shots, and those of us that he brought back returned to those areas where we laughed and cried and lived and died. For me, the ghosts are gone. I got to say my goodbyes in places that if I spoke loud enough, my fallen brothers could hear me. I saw the places where I fought as a kid and parts of the country that I had never been to. I stood on the mountain, both mountains, and walked in places I never would have dared in 1970 and 71. I came to this place. I was one of the lucky ones who went home, and now I've come back. It is now time to go home to Kim, Brent, and Kyle, and if you leave Vietnam once again and the ghosts of my past forever. A year later, in 2006, when my eldest son graduated from high school in Eagle River, he said he wanted the guys there. And I said, Brent, I said, the guys aren't going to come to Alaska for your graduation. But nonetheless, I sent them all an email because I wanted them to know how much they meant to my son. 9 of them, many with their wives, flew to Alaska. They wanted to be there for his graduation. And a few of the guys are here today, and I know they're going to be embarrassed, but I want to introduce them. My band of brothers. Larry Deal, who was my roommate, fellow Cobra pilot. Mark Hilton, who was a Huey pilot. Nate Schaefer, who was one of the crazy guys who flew around in a loach. And Harvey Hopkins, who was our blue platoon leader. Our blues were our artillery platoon. Their job was primarily to go in and get up and down crews and bring the aircraft to be slung out if it got shot down. Anyway, we came from all over the United States, every walk of life, different social classes, different religions, different races. We fought together, we laughed together, we cried together, and we put our lives on the line for each other. We shared our lives together for 24/7 for 365 days. After Vietnam, and with the introduction of the internet, we saw each other out, reconnected. At our first big reunion in Nashville, Tennessee, we had gone out to dinner as we were walking back. My son said to me, Dad, when I grow up, I want to have friends like yours. Well, I said I hope you do, but to try to explain to an 11-year-old how those bonds were formed was quite difficult for me, but I think he understands it now. Our wives met and formed their own bonds, and our children are all of our children. We come together when it's time to say goodbye to one of our brothers, and when we need somebody to talk to, we call each other. At a reunion last year in Reno, one of my roommates, my former roommates, Bobby McNeil, was talking with my wife, Kim. And in the evening, she said, Bobby said he's eternally grateful for you saving his life. And I said, really? And she said, tell me about it. And I said, I haven't got a clue what he's talking about. She said, how can you save somebody's life and not remember? And I said, because we did it every day. Just what we did. That was over half a century ago, but we're still here and we're still there for each other, and we always will be. And now I would like to introduce you to a special friend of mine. I'm not going to steal any of his thunder. I was told not to. Chong Wu and I worked together at a company called DR.DAVE. I retired from active flying last year after 55 years of flying helicopters. And guess what? I was flying a Huey, a medevac for the Marine Corps and the Army. So, Chong, if you'd like to come up.
Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. If I get a little bit too loud, the first horn earlier reminded me how my Marine Corps field instructor could be, so if I get a little bit too loud, just remind me. But before I make my remark to our World War II veterans, gentlemen, thank you. Thanks for setting the standard and providing us the guidance. Us, not only me, but all these ladies and gentlemen from the Vietnam War. So thank you for setting the standard and providing us with guidance. I am honored to be able to speak to you today. So as mentioned, ladies and gentlemen, my name is Chong Nguyen, and I'm currently serving as an air manager for Air Method. And Air Method is an air medical service company. Around here you might see that blue and that white, or sometimes you see a red and white helicopter. That is one of our other company that also operate here, but our company is white and blue. And I have been with our company for about almost 6 years now. As you heard from Randy, during that short amount of time, that is where I get to meet Randy while he was serving as our senior lead pilot for our team. And, you know, with Randy, I quickly learned of his service to our nation in the Army while flying helicopter. And, you know, with that bond, from what I've learned from Randy when he shared those stories, and then for me, you know, the two of us quickly come together because, you know, I am also a veteran. I am a veteran of the Marine Corps. And so when veterans get together, you know, you have that bond that you can just start talking and one thing led to another. We connect with each other that much more. And for me, I had the privilege to serve our nation as a United States Marine for almost 26 years. I joined the Marine Corps when I was 17 years old as an infantry Marine. And earning, by the time that I was done at almost 26 years, I earned the rank of Sergeant Major. I told Randy it's okay if somehow the Command Sergeant Major come out, but in the Marine Corps we don't call it Command Sergeant Major. We just Sergeant Major. But he did great today. He didn't say anything about Command Sergeant Major. But you know, during my service, the Marine Corps contributed to making me who I am today, the person that I am today. The Marine Corps definitely fulfilling its promise by taking me throughout the world, you know, travel the world to places like Afghanistan, Iraq, Syria, it definitely guaranteed and delivered that promise. And also the Marine Corps, along with all of that, enabled me, like many of you, ladies and gentlemen, during the Vietnam War, that meet some of the great friends, your lifelong friend, as Randy shared. And for me, it was Staff Sergeant Jason Ramsar, Staff Sergeant Alan K. Walker, Corporal Michael Estrella, who will always be with me because of our service. I get to meet men like them, and I get to meet so much more of great men and women that our country has to offer, heroic. And so that journey that I had in the Marine Corps, from a perspective of meeting men and women that our country has to offer, I cannot forget. Of course, I get to meet my wife. We're going on 27 years, wedding anniversary soon here. I get to meet my wife during my time in the Marine Corps, and together we are raising our 3 children, and they're growing up so fast. So that's what the Marine Corps and our country have done for me. But you see, that story that I have just shared with you would not have been happening, or would not have been possible if it wasn't for you, ladies and gentlemen, the Vietnam War veteran. If you think about it, you would have heard that story if it wasn't because of you. Your service and sacrifice enabled me to be born. I was born in '76, so you enabled me to be born and then escape that communist country. And your service enabled me to be able then sponsor my parents and my siblings come to the greatest country in the world, the United States of America. And of course, your service enabled me and my family to enjoy the freedom that I have today. And in turn, enabled me to join you in this hangar today to share with you, Randy, I would disagree, the impact that you had. That is what was it. Your service enabled this one person, and dare I say, many, many thousands and counting, to be able to live in a free country, to be able to enjoy the freedom, to be able to do so many things that many other people always wanted, but they will not be able to do unless they are in the United States of America. It is because of you, ladies and gentlemen, of the Vietnam Veteran War, of the Vietnam War. So again, please give those veterans another round of applause. So from the bottom of my heart, and from a grateful nation, we all do a debt of gratitude to your comrades. Many of those will never come home. Your service matters. Because of your service, generation, so far as me, my children, that's 2 generations. My son, I don't know, he's talking about a girlfriend. So I think maybe 3 generations. So many generations to come that will be able to enjoy the freedom that you have given them. So may God continue to bless all of you, ladies and gentlemen. with health and happiness. Thank you, and so will be back.
To close, I want to reiterate the last words from the speech that my friend Joe Galloway, author of We Were Soldiers Once and Young, once gave. Thank you. I salute you. I remember you. I will teach my sons the stories and legends about you, and I will warn my granddaughter to never, ever go out with an Army aviator.
Thank you, Andy. Well, thanks again for attending today. From this time forward, our Vietnam Veterans Day program will be an annual event here at the museum. So hope to see you guys next year.